Thank you. I call Des McNulty to speak to and move Amendment 3584.2.
Thank you very much,
9
Deputy
minutes.
Presiding Officer. Today's debate on the National Planning Framework is very welcome. While we were in government, Labour recognised that Scotland's future economic success depended on coherent policies and early identification of projects of strategic national significance. The need for these crucial development projects should not have to be argued over repeatedly at successive stages in the planning process, causing expensive and unnecessary delays. We brought forward the first National Planning Framework and subsequently planning legislation which enabled a revised framework to be placed on a statutory basis. We welcome the chance for Parliament to comment on this revised document, now informed by strategic environmental assessments of the various projects. As Duncan McNeill has stated, there have been criticisms that the consultation process was geared mainly towards statutory bodies and the larger organisations rather than the wider public. Some people fear the National Planning Framework might fast-track controversial decisions without proper scrutiny, particularly in relation to airport expansion, something Labour would not support. Very little feedback has been given to those putting forward bids for projects from different parts of Scotland to be included where such bids were unsuccessful. The Local Government Committee also heard about lack of timescales, prioritisation and information about financing, complaints familiar from the debate in December on the Strategic Transport Projects Review. Hopefully these process criticisms will be taken on board, but it is important that we highlight deficiencies in the document itself, since this is the only chance we have in the Chamber to influence its content. In my view, too much of the document is taken up with listing challenges that Scotland needs to address, contextualisation rather than evidence-driven policy consideration. Paragraph 52 sets out the main elements of the Government's spatial strategy to 2030, but these are expressed only as intentions, worthy enough but lacking detail. It seems remarkable nonetheless that urban design should feature hardly at all in the Government's development strategy, and that tackling poverty and disadvantage, especially in local authority areas with high concentrations of deprivation, is not given greater prominence. I hope these omissions can be corrected. The real meat of the document, however, is the annex of designated national developments. Labour's amendment, which we hope will be supported across the Chamber, adds the high-speed rail link between Scotland and London to the list. This takes forward the unanimous recommendation of the Transport, Infrastructure and Climate Change Committee report published last Friday. The evidence taken by the committee showed that there were huge potential economic and climate change benefits to be gained from there being a high-speed rail link between Scotland and London, and beyond, since there already is a high-speed link to the Channel. I am well aware that Scottish ministers have been in discussions with Lord Adonis, the UK Rail Minister, about high-speed rail, and indeed Lord Adonis is speaking to committee members next week. I believe it is important that all parties in Scotland signal our commitment by supporting the inclusion of high-speed rail in the National Planning Framework. We are a long way from working out the details of a scheme, identifying a route or estimating the costs. But if our amendment is accepted tonight, I would hope that the Minister would soon be in a position to put forward a statement of need, and that a high-speed rail link between Scotland and London could be added to the list of designated national developments.
Would it be helpful if I say that I very much welcome the change in mood music with the appointment of Andrew Adonis as my opposite number at Westminster, and I very much look forward to working with him on this important subject, where I think there is, at last, a sense of common purpose, while considerable detail has to be worked out.
Des McNulty.
I think that's a very welcome comment from the Minister. Labour believes that NPF Project 10, Improve Rail Connectivity in the West of Scotland, one of only 2 projects from the Strategic Transport Projects Review that's also in NPF 2, should incorporate terminal capacity for high-speed rail as well as Glasgow Crossrail, and that these rail improvements should be prioritised. Edinburgh-Glasgow rail improvements feature in the SPTR, as does new track between Inverkeithing and Holbeath, which is vital in speeding up rail services between Edinburgh and the north and north east of Scotland. We believe these 2 projects should be brought forward as quickly as possible, and we would welcome an indication from the Minister in his contribution of the timetable for delivery. Our amendment recognises or recommends that both interim and long-term targets for reducing emissions are fully taken into account in land use and energy policies. if we want to reach the 80% target, and in particular if we want to adopt an interim target that delivers vital early action on emissions, this must be fully reflected in the list of strategic priorities. It is disappointing, given the urgency of reducing carbon, that practical steps aimed at securing the behavioural changes needed to deliver a step change in energy efficiency in homes and workplaces are not given designated project status alongside energy generation projects in the annex, instead being confined to the body of the document. There are substantial gains to be made from energy efficiency measures for buildings, gathering what the Royal Society of Edinburgh describe as low-hanging fruit. This must be a strategic priority if we are to maximise our opportunities in this planning period to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. On generation and transmission, Project 8 is a new clean coal power station and transshipment facility at Hunterston, and Project 9 is new non-nuclear baseload capacity existing power stations. The Economy, Energy and Tourism Committee argued that technology-specific references should be removed from these project descriptions. Labour would be strongly opposed to any new coal-fired station at Hunterston or anywhere else that did not incorporate effective deployment of carbon sequestration measures from the outset. However, low-carbon technologies should not be excluded from the planning framework, especially if we end up putting reliance instead on unproven clean coal technology. Other countries have greatly expanded their provision of segregated urban walking and cycling routes. Consequently, European cities are much safer for walkers and cyclists than our towns and cities are. Surely active travel, whether for commuting or leisure, must have a much more prominent place in our thinking, whether in urban design, in allocation of road space, and in thinking about planning requirements for housing, retail and workplace developments. Whether this is best done by including a Scotland-wide designated project or by creating incentives or through better regulation within a planning system, I am not sure. But I think we need to look very carefully at how we promote carbon neutrality, whether in transport, in urban design, in housing or in microgeneration, all of which could help us to address climate change. In the time available to me, I have not been able to speak about all the development projects or the policy issues contained in the document. I have some sympathy with the points raised by Patrick Harvey about the lack of opportunity to amend this document. I believe it deserved much more debating time than was allocated. But we should ensure that nothing is read into the inclusion of projects in this framework that short-circuits the necessary discussion in committee and in the chamber when decisions on implementation are to be made. In conclusion, Presiding Officer, I hope the chamber will agree to the proposal to include high-speed rail link amongst the projects and the other matters raised in my amendment, which I move. Thank you.